about the Asian perspective to civic tech. In this talk, I'm going to focus on two case studies from the Asian region. One is Singapore and one is Japan. Let me first go quickly through the research method I used in conducting this research. So I tried to do a study that might be similar to what historians often do. So I rely on second-hand documents largely. They include academic books and articles, official documents, media reports, online archival data. I went to Facebook albums and archives to dig out all these historical records, right? So, well, but I'm not set to so-called discover past facts, right? What I'm trying to do really is to go through these historical documents, which are constructions of different actors, and try to understand their perspectives, right? So you can see that it's a construction or narration of other actors' historical constructions. So through reading these materials, I focused on four things: the entities or organizations involved in these civic tech cases, the metaphors they are using to describe the civic tech they're building, the technology, the concrete pieces of technology they actually built, as well as the people behind them, right, the technologists themselves. So for the interest of time, I'm going to focus on metaphors and technologies in this talk. All right, my first case is Singapore. For many of you who know Singapore, you probably are aware that the Singapore government has been very active in so-called guiding or directing the development of information technologies in the country. So if I want to look for metaphors, I think the best places to look for the metaphors are the IT master plans issued by the government. Over the years, since 1981, there were 7 such IT master plans issued by the Singapore government. So when I read through these documents, I found official metaphors such as computerization, intelligent island, intelligent nation, or smart nation, right? So as you can see from these keywords, these discourses or metaphors share a progressive development perspective to technologies. So these progressive developments emphasize economical survival of the little country, right? And also quite keen in looking into the future. So here I quote Alvin Ling, a local researcher who also read these metaphors. So Alvin Ling analyzed that these metaphors are deeply rooted in the construction of a Singaporean nation. So the nation building discourse shifted from emerging out of a post-colonial history to catching up in late modernity to leading, thus never being left behind again, the country, right, into a utopian future. So the metaphors we see in GovTech documents are mostly progressive development, future-looking, and emphasizes the economic value of technology. So now I'm going to look into or share with you a few concrete pieces of technologies that is actually used or developed through GovTech. So SingPass is the citizen side of a digital identity system to allow citizens to use different public services through one identity. So the website was the first so-called iteration of SingPass. In that website, launched in 2003, citizens were allowed to use just one password to log into the system and access various public services. The second technology you see here is a physical token. This SingPass token called OneKey was launched in 2011. So the OneKey token is supposed to help users to log in their SingPass website without a mobile phone, right? So the token will serve as a two-factor authentication function to make the login safer or more secure, right? However, starting from April 2021, last year, this token is no longer available. Physical tokens will be eliminated and fully replaced by a mobile application called the SingPass Mobile. The SingPass Mobile allow you to use a password, use SMS one-time PIN to log in. It also allows users to use their fingerprints and face verification to log in. Okay, so this example, right, I think is a good example of the so-called fast evolving technologies that you can see in Singapore. The mindset or the metaphor of a progressive development is fully shown in this case. Right? This means that the newer technologies are always better than the older technologies. So users will have more convenience, use these tools to access different kinds of services. However, these kind of easiness and convenience have to be presumed upon a certain level of digital capacity. Right? When the token was completely taken off and the mobile phone became the only way to verify one's identity in SingPass, this basically means that those people who don't have a fully functioning smartphone, or those people who are not really capable of using all the functions on the smartphone, will not be able to actually use a SingPass in a digital way anymore, right? All right, so that's basically the so-called gov side of the story about Singapore Civic Tech. Now let me move to the more social side of the story, the Civic Tech entities. As I mentioned before, there are two types of Civic Tech entities. The ones on the left are what we call the community building entities. So Singapore Computer Society was actually established in 1967. The Internet Society Singapore chapter was approved in 2011. Hackerspace SG was built in 2009, followed by multiple instances of Makerspace. So Hackerspace focused on the software, Makerspace focused on the hardware. Well, the 2010s witnesses the flourishing of community building entities. These entities are hosted in academic institutions, private startups, and even chapters of internet entities. Right? So whereas these community building entities aim at helping the professionals to network with each other, to develop their professional skills, we have another type of civic tech entities in Singapore that actually focus on using technologies to solve civic issues, similar to the disaster map I mentioned before. Well, you have three examples here: engineering good. The second one is DataKind SG. The third one is Good. Right? So engineering good is actually an NGO, right? And DataKind SG was set up as a private company. Goodhood.sg, as far as I know, is only just a Grant Hub initiative. So the first two examples appeared around 2014. Goodhood was only launched in 2020. Okay, so here are the so-called concrete technologies they have built over the years to help address the civic challenges. The two pictures here come from engineering good. So engineering good has run a very long-term project, which is to repair old computers and distribute these old computers to people who need it, right? So another project they have run is called the Salvage Garden. So the Salvage Garden is to develop assistive technologies to help the disabled people. For instance, in this one, a mouse with very big buttons and switches was designed so the disabled people can control their mouse more easily, right? Picture here, right, comes from Data SG, DataKind SG. So DataKind SG is basically a group of volunteers. They gather these volunteers and train them and run hackathons These hackathons will invite so-called NGOs or CSOs to join. They have worked with Red Cross, Singapore's Children's Society, to figure out, how they can take advantage of the data the NGOs collected, to make their organization run better, right? So that's data kind SG. The last example is basically goodhood.sg. Goodhood is actually a mobile application. This mobile application allows members of a neighborhood to request for help, items or services or time, right? And they also allow neighbors to actually offer helps. I'm available during 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. to help you walk your dog, for instance. Right? So this kind of platform tries to basically rebuild the spirit of a kampong or the community among the modern neighborhoods. All right, so I read through the news reports, websites, about pages, Facebook posts, surrounding these organizations and their technologies. Now, here is what I found in terms of the metaphors or the ideas they use during Civic Tech development. First, these Civic Tech entities, they do not always look forward. Instead, they look backward, or they look at the present, and they want to solve the problems immediately, not in the future. Okay. Secondly, these entities do not really advocate for the most so-called innovative technologies. Instead, they use a lot of the old technologies, or the technologies that are very much accessible in the current market. Certainly, these entities, although not all of them are completely so-called NGOs, right, non-profits, but making big money or making a big profit is not really their major goal. Many of these volunteers are actually full-time employees working for big tech companies. So they make money there and they don't make money from their volunteering. Okay. So I'm done with introducing the Singapore case. Now it's time to move on to our second case, Japan. Here I have to really thank my collaborator, Dr. Lin Tai-Wei from East Asia Institute at the US, who helps us to lead the project on the Japan case. So in Japan, right, we found this very interesting civic tech entities called Code for Japan. So my talk today is going to focus on Code for Japan as a civic tech entity. Well, code for XYZ, or code for groups, were actually not originated from Japan. The United States was the birthplace for all these code for groups. The first code for group was found in the US in 2009. And now all these code for groups have spread it all over the world, including even Africa. So many of these code for all groups members, they've worked as volunteers to for the technologists to make a difference on social issues. Right? There were a lot of overlaps between code for groups and what we call the hacker and the maker communities. As time goes on, as United States government opened spaces for these code for groups to join their digital initiatives, some of these groups became vendors and contractors working for governments. And some members of these code for groups actually joined the government to work from inside. Right? So that's a brief history of code for XYZ organizations you see worldwide. The Code for Japan organization was founded in 2013, right, and located in Tokyo. Since then, there were lots of so-called local chapters or brigades developing around Japan. Now you can see code for Kyoto, code for Hokkaido, code for Osaka, almost all over the country, right? So I look at code for Japan and try to figure out the kind of metaphor and idea that drives their work, right? So I've noticed the one keyword called co-creation, right? In the organization's own introduction, it says that they would like to bring to the public's attention that local authorities are not the only ones who have the responsibility to resolve civic issues. Citizens can play active roles in these kind of solutions. So their mission is actually to bring citizens, corporates as well, right, private corporates, and local governments together to co-create solutions. So the responsibilities and the abilities are distributed among all the different three categories of actors. Code for Japan functions as a hub or as a center to join the forces from the three types of actors in order to solve local issues. All right, in terms of the concrete technologies Code for Japan has developed, I decided to use the COVID technologies as illustrations. So Code for Japan designed information site, right? One of the first ever information sites in the country to understand infection control, so-called information. They provided infographics on this website to show the number of infections and tests in the Tokyo area. This website was actually requested by the Tokyo metropolitan government and became available as early as in March 2020. Interestingly, the system, right, was built upon open code or open source softwares, as I just mentioned before, FOSS Asia, so that this system or this template can actually be replicated very fast. The local Code for Japan members started to replicate or rebuild their local versions of this information site, resulting in 57 such kind of spin-off sites in 45 prefectures in Japan, right? So let me now continue with introducing a very interesting story about two contact tracing apps. In most Asian countries, contact tracing apps are developed by the government, right? In Singapore, contact tracing app Trace Together, right, has actually led to some controversies regarding the compulsory usage of the app. Here we have two contact tracing apps, not just one, in Japan. On your left-hand side is called Mamori Japan app. The right-hand side is another contact tracing app called Cocoa. So what happens in Japan? The Mamori Japan app was actually first developed by Code for Japan as early as in May 2020. Code for Japan answered again a request from a doctor from a major Tokyo hospital who asked them to help to build a contact tracing app. So Code for Japan quickly recruited 50 highly skilled talents who have worked with them before to build this contact tracing app. What's interesting is, again, the contact tracing app is built upon open source softwares, and Code for Japan has shared all their knowledge and codes with the Japan central government. So based on this sharing, and Japan central government later launched their own version of contact tracing app used nationwide, Cocoa. Right? After the Japanese government launched this official contact tracing app, Mamori Japan actually retired into a supplementary or periphery kind of status. It's an interesting case here where you see that the Japanese central government trusted or at least allowed Civic Tech entity to develop a piece of critical technology, right? So what puzzles me is why does Japanese central government trust Code for Japan this much? This signifies that the Japanese central government has somehow taken Code for Japan into their inner so-called circle of bureaucracy, right? This is a result of a long-term relationship. So Code for Japan used to work with local governments on various disasters, especially like the 2011 earthquake. So during the earthquakes, the Code for Japan groups actually develop all kinds of applications to help manage the disaster. So working with these local governments later on also becomes a source of income for Code for Japan, right? So they take commissioned works from these local governments and basically make themselves sustainable through the collaboration. The Japanese bureaucracy, right, is a professional bureaucracy that does not really change their policies very easily. Although politicians come and go through elections, the bureaucracy itself is rather stable. So by building a stable and long-term relationship with a bureaucracy, especially at the local levels, civic tech technology initiatives such as CFJ is able to gain the trust of the government and contribute to developing very critical technologies such as contact tracing apps. All right, so what do I intend to draw conclusions from these two cases, the comparisons of these two cases? Well, we can say that there are probably two types of government and society co-driven in civic tech initiatives. In the Singapore case, the government drive the more mainstream and critical technological development, such as identity system, such as contact tracing systems, right? In the meanwhile, you see civic tech initiatives drive towards another direction, which is basically to provide supplementary services to minority groups, right? So government drive the mainstream, society drives maybe the periphery. However, interesting in the Japan case, especially during COVID-19, we see that the government and society are driving critical technological development towards the same direction, right? So civic tech initiatives such as Code for Japan was able to also become part of the critical technological development because of the long-term relationship working with the local governments first, then the central government.